In the beginning of the gods, there was no throne without terror beneath it. Uranus and Gaia, sky and earth, had warned their son Cronus of a fate he could not escape. One of his own children would rise to overthrow him, just as he himself had overthrown his father. Cronus did not wait to test the prophecy. Each time his wife rebore him a child, he took the infant from her arms and swallowed it whole, sealing it inside his own body, believing that a god devoured could never grow to challenge him. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, one after another, they vanished into their father's throat. This was not a myth of monsters. At the edge of the world, this was a myth about power that survives only by consuming the future. Re, exhausted by grief, resolved that her sixth child would not share that fate. She traveled in secret to the island of Crete, to a cave on Mount Ida, hidden from her husband's sight, and there she gave birth to Zeus. In place of the newborn god, she wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and handed it to Cronus, who swallowed it without hesitation. Certain he had erased another threat, he had, in fact, planted the very instrument of his undoing. The infant Zeus could not simply be left unguarded. Re entrusted him to the nymphs of Crete, and according to several versions of the myth, to the goat goddess Amalthea, who suckled him with her own milk, while honey supplemented his diet in some tellings. Around the cave, the Curetes, armed young warriors, danced in armor, clashing spears against shields in rhythmic, deafening noise. Their purpose was not ceremony. It was concealment. Any infant's cry that might reach Cronus was drowned beneath bronze and drumbeat, and so Zeus grew in hidden safety, on the same island later associated with the Minoan civilization, where echoes of a young sky god being protected by armed guardians may have shaped the Greek tale itself. Notably, this motif of a divine infant hidden from a devouring father recurs far beyond Greece. In Near Eastern myth, the Hittite storm god Teshub was likewise linked to concealment narratives, and in Egyptian tradition, the infant Horus was hidden among reeds to escape the wrath of Set, his father's murderer. Such parallels suggest an ancient, widely shared anxiety across Mediterranean cultures, that sovereignty itself is always vulnerable at its most fragile beginning. Years passed, and the infant became a god in full strength. Though still without a throne, still without a single sibling free in the world. Zeus understood something his father never had. Raw force alone would not undo what Cronus had done. He required cunning. Ancient sources diverge on the details. Apollodorus credits the plan to Metis, a Titaness renowned for wisdom, who prepared a potion, sometimes described as an emetic drug, and gave it to Zeus, or in another telling to Re, who then fed it to Cronus in his drink. Cronus, racked with sudden and violent sickness, vomited forth every child he had swallowed, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades. And Poseidon emerged alive, fully grown, along with the stone that had once been mistaken for Zeus himself, which the Greeks claimed was later set at Delphi as a sacred relic, called the omphalos, marking what they believed to be the very navel of the world. This was the true reversal of Cronus's crime, not destruction answered with greater destruction, but restoration through intelligence. With his brothers and sisters freed and standing beside him, Zeus led them into the long war against Cronus and the elder Titans, a conflict Hesiod calls the Titanomachy, lasting 10 years by some accounts, until the Titans were finally overthrown and cast down into Tartarus, the deep abyss beneath the earth. But the war itself is not where this story lingers, for the character of Zeus is not defined only by the battle he won. It is defined by what he built afterward and how he chose to build it. Once victory placed the cosmos in his hands, Zeus did not consolidate power through conquest alone. Hesiod's Theogony tells us that his first wife was Metis herself, the very Titaness whose cunning had freed his siblings, a union joining raw sovereignty with intellect at the very foundation of his reign. He then took Themis, goddess of divine law and order, as consort, fathering the Horii and the Fates through her, weaving justice and destiny directly into the architecture of his rule. Where Cronus had ruled through fear and swallowed threats whole, Zeus, in these early unions, chose to marry the very qualities his father lacked. This pattern of strategic marriage, scholars note, mirrors a broader feature of divine kingship across ancient Mediterranean religions, where a supreme god's authority is legitimized not merely by conquest, but by union with personifications of order, law, and wisdom, as if raw power alone were never sufficient grounds for lasting rule. Yet the pattern that had haunted his family was not finished with him. Gaia and Uranus, the primordial powers who had warned Cronus of his downfall, delivered a new prophecy, one that struck at the heart of Zeus's own marriage. Metis, they revealed, was destined to bear two children, a daughter equal to her father in wisdom and spirit, and after her, a son who would grow to overthrow Zeus as king of gods and men, just as Zeus had overthrown Cronus. And Cronus before him had overthrown Uranus. The cycle that had defined 3 generations of divine kingship now threatened to claim a fourth. Some ancient sources place this warning not in the mouths of Gaia and Uranus, but in the words of an oracle consulted by Zeus himself, yet the substance remains the same. The son not yet born carried the seed of Zeus's destruction. Here stood the defining test of his reign, and it was not a monster or an army. It was his own household repeating his father's nightmare with mathematical precision. Zeus now faced the exact dilemma that had once turned Cronus into a devourer of his children, and the manner of his response would determine whether he was truly different from the tyrant he had replaced. Cronus, faced with prophecy, had swallowed his children out of blind fear, treating wisdom and threat as identical, and destroying both without discernment. Zeus chose a different path, though the action itself echoed his father's grotesquely. According to Hesiod, Zeus deceived Metis with cunning words, then swallowed her whole while she was already pregnant with their daughter. He did not act from panic alone. Apollodorus and later mythographers frame this act as calculated. Zeus absorbed not merely a threat, but the very source of wisdom itself, taking Metis's cunning intelligence into his own body, so that her counsel would forever reside within him rather than being lost to destruction or left to gestate into a rival. The name Metis itself in Greek means cunning wisdom, practical intelligence, the very quality by which schemes are outwitted. Zeus did not eliminate this quality from the world, he made it permanently his own. This act of swallowing a pregnant consort to absorb her power finds a curious echo far outside Greece. In certain Mesopotamian traditions, the god Marduk gains supremacy partly by consuming or subsuming the powers of defeated rivals, suggesting that the assimilation of a threat, rather than its mere destruction, was a recurring model of kingship across the ancient world. Time passed, and Zeus began to suffer a headache beyond any mortal or divine comparison, a pain splitting his skull from within, as though something living pressed against the bone, demanding release. The gods of Olympus, according to the most widely told version of the myth, summoned Hephaestus, master of the forge, who took an axe, in some accounts a specially made bronze implement, and split open the skull of Zeus at his own request. Other ancient sources name Prometheus as the one who performed this act, a divergence the classical tradition never fully resolved. And it is worth noting that in certain accounts the birth takes place not on Olympus, but beside the river Triton in Libya. Another point on which the ancient mythographers never agreed. From the open skull sprang Athena, not as an infant but as a fully grown goddess, dressed already in gleaming armor, spear in hand, letting out a war cry that shook Olympus and the heavens above it. She was not born of woman, nor raised in hidden caves like her father had been. She emerged complete, wisdom and warfare fused into a single form, a living demonstration of what her father had absorbed rather than destroyed. Homer's Iliad refers to her simply as the daughter of Zeus, without ever narrating this strange birth directly, which suggests the skull birth tradition, however dominant it became, was elaborated more fully by later poets and mythographers than by the earliest layers of Greek epic. Consider the symmetry of this ending against the horror of the beginning. Cronus feared his children and swallowed them to erase them, and that fear made him a tyrant who ruled through terror, until his own children rose against him regardless, exactly as prophesied. Zeus faced the same prophecy, the same warning of a child destined to dethrone him, and he too swallowed the one who carried that fate. But where Cronus's act was pure erasure, an attempt to unmake the threat entirely, Zeus's act was assimilation. He kept Metis alive within himself, forever counseling him from inside his own mind, and in doing so, he transformed the very prophecy that should have destroyed him into the source of his most enduring strength. Athena, born of that union, became not his usurper, but his most trusted and beloved child, patron of strategy and wisdom, standing forever at her father's side rather than against his throne. This, ultimately, is the difference the entire myth insists upon. Raw power, the kind Cronus wielded and Zeus first displayed in overthrowing the Titans. can seize a throne, but it cannot secure one indefinitely, because force invites equal or greater force in return, generation after generation. What secured Zeus's reign permanently, what none of his predecessors achieved, was his willingness to internalize the very wisdom that threatened him rather than simply destroying or fearing it. He did not break the cycle of prophecy through greater violence. He broke it by becoming wise enough to make the threat part of himself. That, more than any thunderbolt or war against titans, is the true foundation of his rule atop Olympus.